Okay, so one of the things I wanted to talk about, and this is the document I'm opening is the HAR 004 drawing tools. We're playing around with this earlier, but one thing I wanted to mention was if you look at any of the tools, it shows you what the shortcut keys are. And this is the thing that I didn't realize initially. Like select key is Option S, contour is Option Q, the brush is Option B. So there's all of these little things, but they're started off with Option. And I was like, that's interesting. But here's the deal with that. If I'm on, for instance, the rectangle tool. Now, rectangle tool is what? Option 7. The brush is Option I. So literally, okay, so if I were to draw out a shape or something like that, if I wanted to fill this, the trick is I'm still on my rectangle tool. However, the paint tool is like I. So if I hold down the I, not Option I, but if I hold down the I temporarily get that other tool, which is the case with almost any of the tools that are here. So for instance, the eyedropper itself is like D. Paint bucket is I, that's 7. But pretty much each of these has their own little key, and you can jump back and forth while still using the other one to get things going. Okay. One of the other things that I'm doing with my setup here, if you notice this is kind of brushed or kind of grayed back, it's because I have on my light table. This is a little different than onion skin. With light table, it basically says whatever layer you're selecting, that's going to be the layer that's most prominent. Everything else is going to be kind of frosted back. The brush tool itself, with any of the tools, whether your brush, pencil, even the rectangle tools and things like that, and the pen tools, you're pretty much, you can change out the width or the size of the brush by holding down your O key and clicking and dragging to the right to make it larger, drag to the left to make it smaller. Okay. Also, with respect to the brush, you have your different options here. This top one is basically for you to experiment. So if you start changing the size, you can even click the extended properties, the triangle here, and figure out, do you want a solid vector? Do you want it to be a diamond shape, square shape? You can also come down and select textured vector. Okay. And you can also take a look at how, I guess, what is that little thing? You got roundness, tilt, all those different things if you really want to get into this. All right. Now I'm doing this with my mouse. If I were using my stylus, I of course have thick and thin and pressure sensitivity. So, but yeah, the only thing is if I'm drawing with my mouse, I don't get any of that. If I'm turning around and drawing with my tablet, this is that same brush, but I have a little more play with that. That being said, if you are only using, let me hold on my command key for a second. If you are only using a mouse, there are, I think it's here, I'm trying to remember. I think it's in the pencil tool actually. Like the pencil tool will automatically give you some nice thick and thins. There's a little icon. Let me scroll down here. If you see this weird little Z, it's basically meaning that even if I'm drawing with my mouse, and this is the pencil, not the brush, but if I'm drawing with my mouse, it'll go in and do a nice little thick and thin for me. Things like that. It's not going to do, I don't think it has a transparency, but yeah. Now, speaking of the pencil tool, the other thing about this, and let me grab I'm just going to grab my uniform thickness here. The other thing about this, of course, you can hold down your shift key to get straight lines. Like if I start drawing, then hold down shift, I've got a straight line I can pull out. The other thing is, if I want to start drawing this, if I hold down my command key, this is going to make sure it keeps that little box closed, or keeps my shape closed rather. Now, me personally, this is what I was talking about earlier. It's a lot easier to use to do this using like the rectangle tool. We can just kind of click and drag out points, and then go to your contour editor. And with this, I'm just going in and connecting kind of where I think little sections should be. So I'm just dragging out those points here because I'm paying attention to, do I think I can get a curve out of this line here and out of this line? And the way you do that simply is hold down your shift key. And this is again still on the contour editor. I'm just pulling it out. The reason I'm holding down shift, if I didn't hold down shift, it can pull other points and I don't want that. By holding down shift, it'll grab just that one particular path. All right. And I can still come in here afterward, click on these points and adjust my direction handles, or for my Bezier curves, one of those. Okay. The other part of this would be, it doesn't have to keep this little solid line. I think the lines, or the pencil lines, and even like the shape lines, are kind of underrated considering how much you can do with them. If I grab my select tool, I can select this little guy here. I can still come over to my properties, and at the bottom here, there's like little textures. And probably my favorite thing to do is like add, let me think. Where are we at? Is it grain? Yes, grain. Because it ends up looking like a nice little pencil line there, instead of it looking so clean and vector. Okay, let me get rid of these lines for a second. Under the shape tool, the rectangle, ellipse, line, polyline. I have no idea why they called it that, but literally, yeah, here's the pen tool. But it's called polyline. Okay. All right. Your select tool, this little guy up top, the black arrow, there's a lot that it can do. So for instance, if I click on this shape is grouped with this little puddle there, but you've got the ability to like kind of rotate the corners. You can also skew this. You also have a pivot point. This is temporary, but it's a pivot point dead center. So I can move this wherever and then rotate from there. If I click off of it, the pivot point definitely goes back dead center. But just going to the corners of our bounding box here, I can actually manipulate and change things. A little bit of skew. And last but not least, what I'll do is I can right click, and kind of like Illustrator, I can do send to back, like arrange send to back. And I can still manipulate this a bit. Now, the other thing that might not be obvious with this, especially if let me grab this, grabbing the rectangle tool, what might not be obvious is with the select tool, I can literally, at least I thought I could, Nope, I'm actually saying it incorrect. That's not the tool I'm thinking about. Select tool, of course, we can actually do all of the points, which makes sense. However, with our contour, I can literally click on one of these and just press delete. Okay. And of course, I can still curve them. One of the first things I ever did with Toon Boom products is simply taking like playing with the rectangle tool, pull this down straight. And the one thing that you can do with the contour editor is I've got 4 points here, but I can still come in, hold on my command key, and that would be control on PC. I can add extra points if I want. All right, so, and then I can still curve. So it's pretty much making my little, almost making a little leg here. The next thing is talking about the cutter tool. The cutter tool is kind of versatile, and this little thing in the beginning is probably one of the least ways I ever use it, but it is possible. Cutter tool is located right under the select tool. And what you can do with this is just kind of draw out what you want to cut. This is destructive, by the way. This isn't like it's masking something out. All right, so I can literally pull this part off, or I can just simply press delete. Now, we'll get into this later, but there's a cutter tool, but there's also a cutter node that does something totally different. And what's one of the few things that I complain about with the program, and I'm normally saying this on recording because it's like, okay, guys, use a thesaurus. We've got a tool and a node called the same thing to do totally opposites. But yeah, we'll notice that later. The cutter node is used a lot, but it's not like the tool. It's more of a masking type thing. The cutter tool still with the brush, this is where things come in handy. And instead of you trying to get like these perfect little lines all the time, if I come over here, where's my little guy here? If I'm using this thing and I go, great, let me get some shapes going on here. Thing with the brush, or excuse me, the cutter tool, when it's respecting the brush, is I can pull off all these extra points. Now, the only weird thing, and you can kind of see it here with the brush that I've used, is, let me go back to my select tool. It's literally cutting up things. So there's little pieces of the stuff left if you take it apart. So if you're going to do this, this is a best practice to make sure that you're already, this is mostly done, just going in and cleaning up the lines. So the only thing you would do with the cutter, and this is called a mouse gesture. It's set up this way by default. It's on lasso, and the mouse gesture icon is here. And it's just like you're doing a little check mark on lines here. Now, if you're like me, occasionally, you'll end up doing, let me see if I can break this. You'll end up doing something like this, which makes it act like it was with the watermelon. If that does happen, you can still click off of that and come back and just kind of do the little mouse gesture, the little pull there. So if you note, I'm not just doing this on any line in particular, but it's like right where they're crossing over. And some people like to design this way because instead of you trying to get exactly to a point, you're coming in and letting this tool help you with your cleanup. All right. The one thing I would tell you though, the paintbrush, using the cutter tool with the paintbrush, you get these really nice sharp points. That's not the case when working with the pencil using the same thing. Same character here, but instead of brush lines, these are pencil lines. I would still do the same thing, which by the way, I still have my settings wrong. By default, I want to say, let me come up here. If I look over in tool properties, I'm on cutter, tool properties. I want to set this tip style to round. It was set to chisel, which is why that little area looked weird. Now that's only going to show up when, that's only really a concern when you're using that with the pencil. And this is what I was talking about. It's nice, but it's not a really, really sharp point there. Okay. By the way, let me try to share one thing with you all that's a major lifesaver. I'll let you in on my cheat sheet. Anytime you run into an issue like mouse gesture breaker mode, what the heck is that? The help section, unlike most help sections, this is literally how do you get to the Harmony Encyclopedia. If you go under help and do online help, and this happens with whatever version you're on. If you're on Harmony Premium, if you're on Harmony Essentials, Harmony 21, whatever, you can be on Harmony 16. This is online, but you can literally go in here and type in, let's say, cutter tool. Okay, cutter tool properties, thank you. And so here, it's breaking down everything that is possible. And this is where I'm going to be diving into later going, hey, what is that other button for? But yeah, this definitely comes in handy. And I like to use a lot. Sometimes, yes, if you notice, we've got little videos that'll pop up for it. Which, by the way, if you're wondering what exactly did I do to get my lines, because I was trying to see if I was doing anything extra, simply pressing the letter K is where you can actually see the outlines of what you're working on. But yeah, that's the difference between using the cutter for the pencil tool versus the brush tool. Now, this one is kind of going back to the contour editor. And the one thing that I had to learn, I guess not necessarily the hard way, there's sometimes when you want to hold down your shift key just to make sure you only get this one particular line, and sometimes you want to just kind of do it without that. This top of the hat, definitely hold down shift to pull that up. However, down here where there's like the brim of the hat, and you need both of those to kind of go over, I'm not going to hold down shift here and just pull this little line out. And if you note, that line comes out separate. But the trick that, and again, one of those I wish I knew early on, you also have your options here. Like I can turn on this little magnet, which is going to give me by default snap to contour, which means if I pull this to this line, it's perfectly going to snap there. Not like when I'm not going to like overshoot or anything. So for instance, pull right down there, looks good. Now from that point, I would just, again, hold on my shift key. And shift means you're just bending that one particular line. And if I want to be exact, this guy probably needs 2 points. So that looks good until about here-ish. So if you want to add another point, you would hold down your command key, and that would be Control on PC. And that way I can bend this other line. And I've got my little handles. Of course, this is still snapping, so let me turn off my magnet. And I can get it as exact as possible there. If both of your handles are moving at the same time, you can hold down Option and pull on one of the handles instead. So let me bring this guy up. Not terrible. This little spot here, if you notice where his little hat brim is, perfect place to place perfect place to place, sorry. Another point. So I can curve this line and then curve this line. Now, this might seem like it's a lot of work. However, especially if you're talking about cutout animation, you're building these out for the most part one time. You might manipulate them over time, but you're not having to do this for every single frame. Okay. Now, if you notice, I'm using a lot of little shortcuts. I keep hitting my space bar to get the hand. I can move this around, and of course, zooming in and out. There's also holding down Command and Option, that's Control Alt on PC. And this looks like an animation disk, which means I can rotate this entire canvas, zoom in, and work on it if it feels more comfortable. And once I'm done with this, to get it back to normal rotation would be Shift and the letter X, and normal magnification would be Shift and the letter M. Or shortcut for just both of these, let me do something really crazy. Make this upside down, go way in. If I did Shift M, boom, resets everything with this one little set. The pencil editor, what this guy is talking about is literally, you can go in, even if you've drawn everything out flat, you can still come in here. And pencil editor, centerline editor, there's a lot of these right under the section here. Pencil editor basically means I can click on, let me click on the smile here. And what this allows you to do, it's kind of like contour editor, but I can go in and give a nice thick and thin to a line that's already been created. Okay. Much like the contour editor, I can still click on something, and if I want to add a point, but hold on my Command key, and that's Control on PC. And I can thicken out things that way. I can tighten in the end of that, and even the end here, I can either pull this in, which I probably need to hold down my Shift key when I do that, pull it in, or bring that way out to a point if I wanted to. These ends do have direction handles, but this is still a line. It's just treating it as if it's like a brush stroke or something. Okay. So if I go to my regular contour editor, like this is still one line going right down the middle there. But the pencil editor is how they're doing this nice little thick and thin. Like if you look at where the arm goes in there, or the hand goes up there. So if I pull this in, well, not that way, Tony. All right, and tighten that up a little bit. Put on my Shift key first. And I think, let me add a point here. Maybe that's why I was being weird. Okay. So add a point there and shrink this in a little. So you're not just having that really just stiff little line there. But if there's one thing I love to say a lot when it comes to working in this field, most important pieces of hardware and software, paper and pencil. Write out your ideas first so you don't end up being a kid in a candy store. It's like, think about the first time you ever found filters in Photoshop. and just kept adding things. All right, so that's the pencil line editor. And again, it comes in handy because you can get, just because something's drawn out doesn't mean it's written in stone. You can still go back in here and like manipulate it a bit. Now, as far as the brush is concerned, there is the center line editor. By default, so if I look at I'm going to use my contour editor for a second. If I look at this is a brush stroke, so it's a fill. There's no line going down the center, which is why a lot of people prefer using the pencil tool versus the brush tool, because if you need to manipulate the line, you can. However, with the center line editor, I can click, and this is still a brush line, but it's now acting like it's an actual stroke. So like the contour editor, I'm going to hold on my command key, add a little extra line there. That's Control on PC. And if I hold on my shift key, I can bend out that line. Let's bend out the southern line. Click my point. I've now got some direction handles to play with. All right. But this didn't convert this over to a pencil line, which you can do. This is still our little paintbrush contour here. I can still do thick and thins with that because it's got all that weird stuff going on. But with the center line editor, not that one, the other one. What the center line editor allows you to do is just kind of treat it like it's a stroke. We kind of talked about this a little earlier, like the whole textured vector lines. If we look really close, I think that is, and I always forget it, what that's called, but I'm going to grab, well, not that one. Let me grab my select tool, grab all of those. And if I come over here, oh yeah, bumpy. If I make it bumpy thin, I think that's what that is. That's the texture there. Textured vector brushes is kind of the same thing. You can still grab your brush tool, and this is coming in here. This is what I was talking about earlier. You have the ability to change out the different brush tips. Now, if you notice, with the brush, where you're going to find those presets are a little bit, they're not going to find the textures down there at the bottom. However, if you do land on something that you like, let's see if I can do this really quick. Smoothing, paper texture, you can change out those, dual tip. One of the things you can do is if you grab or find something you like there, you can always come up and say, I'm going to save that as a brush preset, this little pencil up top. And that would just be like, if I call this brush TR3 or something. And that way, in my little area down here, there's brush TR1, okay, there's TR3. So this gives me a little preset that I just made. Okay, stabilizer tool. This one is a little interesting, one, because you can't just look up stabilizer, you won't find it. It's actually located under pen settings. So the way Harmony works again is like you have your windows, but you also have these little bars here. These are toolbars. Like you see that little short rectangle with anything, there are all these different toolbars. So to get to the stabilizer, you would have to go to Windows, Toolbars, and then come down to Pen Settings. Now this in particular, if you look up here, this is where mine just popped up. If you like it, it's great. But the one thing I'll notice that a lot of people end up forgetting that it's on, and they're like, okay, how do I turn this back off? Stabilizer means that if I decide, let me see if I can do this with the, let me use my pencil tool. And so if I try to draw this little dude, one, I'm going to see if I can get my same brush size here, or same pencil size. If I try to draw, let's say the horn, I have my stabilizer off right now. Not terrible. I'm going to try that again, but this time I'm going to turn the stabilizer on. It says average right now by default it's 34. So if I try to draw this, okay. So my hand looks like it shook a lot less. See if I can get any closer. So there's already a center line smoothing, as it were, inside of all of your brushes. You can change that. Stabilizer takes it a little bit further. Outside of that, there's also pulled string. You will either love or hate this. I am not a fan. But pulled string basically means as I start with this, there's this little line. So I can pull the string here. To get it close to where I want it to be. Okay. Now, me personally, I usually use neither one, mainly because I really like using a rectangle tool now. But once you're done with this, definitely make sure you turn that off. And if your students are like, hey, this thing has this weird little line every time I try to draw, it's like they probably have pulled string turned on. But yeah, that's where your stabilizer is. You can always, let me do this real quick. So I can scan Windows and its toolbars, pen settings. If you want, you can always build out your pencil so it has more centerline smoothing. Like right now, this says a 5 by default. So if I try to draw a square, you see it shift a little bit, right? If I crank this up, let's say to 50 or 75, and try to draw a square, that's what it does. Okay. Same token, there's some people who, some of my colleagues who hate that it corrects anything. You can always drag this down to 0 and it's not going to correct anything. So you don't see any jumps at all because it's just doing what you put in. Okay. But again, by default, it's usually set at about 5. Okay. Now for me, it's still easy to just grab rectangle tool and just kind of pull out my points where I want them to be. Let's go there, there. Let's go there, and I think that's it, maybe. But yeah, I would probably just do something like